I was sitting alone at the airport, staring out the window. 15 years ago, my son David and his wife Amy left their son Lucas, who was refusing to attend school, with me and flew abroad. He's a failure. I can't believe he won't even go to school. Those words David had said back then came rushing back as I stood here, facing them again after all this time. Don't you two have anything to say? But the two of them just smirked, refusing to give me a proper response. Enough is enough. But just as I was about to speak, I caught myself. That was because I noticed a young man approaching from behind David and Amy, dressed sharply in his uniform. It was Lucas, heading to Germany for a flight today. See you later. What? David and Amy looked shocked, but quickly began muttering something in frustration. I am Margaret, widowed early when my husband Kevin passed away. I now live alone at 60, in a single-family home. Looking back through old journals and diaries, I can't help but reflect on everything that happened with David. The days we fought, the sports events we attended, parent-teacher conferences, college entrance exams. So many events that seemed significant then now feel like fleeting moments. After all, I was never really his mom. Gazing at my journal, I remember the first time I met David. David was my stepchild. At 13, sitting across from me in a coffee shop near the train station, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. When I spoke to him, he would either shake his head or nod slightly. Hardly a conversation. It was likely due to his adolescent awkwardness. Later, he told me I was embarrassed back then and couldn't find the words. Even now, he can still be awkward at times, but at least he talks to me more. Perhaps Kevin's last words, "Take care of Mom," had something to do with that. Shortly after remarrying me, Kevin fell ill and left this world, leaving behind this house and David. Thinking of how much he must have wished to see David grow makes me unbearably sad. Pouring all my love into seeing him grow became my greatest hope, especially as I was unable to have children with Kevin. To David, I might have seemed like a stranger who suddenly appeared in his life, but to me, he was my precious son. I tried my best to support him, quietly standing by his side. David graduated from college and secured a position at a major company. The night we celebrated his new job, David drank a beer and said, "Margaret, once I start working, I'm moving out." He never calls me Mom. I answered simply, "All right," while feeling a slight pang of loneliness. "Make sure you eat properly and take care of yourself. And don't forget to visit once in a while." He nodded lightly and moved into his new apartment a few days later. As I watched him leave, I was left with a mix of emotions, loneliness, but also a sense of accomplishment. A year and a half passed after seeing David off, and a turning point arrived. By this time, I had grown close to my neighbors, and we often spent time together. We'd get excited over small plans, like going on trips or attending local festivals. One day, my smartphone rang. It was David. "Hi, Mom. It's me, David." "Well, this is a surprise. What's going on?" "I have someone I want you to meet. Are you free this Saturday?" Of course, I was free. When I told him so, David said, "Great. I'll come by around noon," and hung up just as quickly. His style of keeping conversations short and straight to the point hadn't changed. As promised, that Saturday, David arrived with a woman by his side. "My name is Amy. I'm dating David," she said. She was stunning, like an actress or a model. "Oh, so she's your girlfriend? I'm planning to marry her. And there's more. She's pregnant." Shifting my gaze between Amy's belly and David's face, I was stunned. News of David's engagement and a grandchild All at once it was almost too much joy to handle. I wholeheartedly congratulated them. Time flew by after that, and Amy's due date drew near. She spoke excitedly, brimming with hope for the child. "It's a boy. I hope he'll grow up to be a doctor or a pilot." She even shared the name they'd chosen for the baby. Watching her, I couldn't help but feel a bit concerned. It's not wrong to have dreams for a child, but maybe her expectations were a bit too high. Despite my worries, the baby was born healthy and strong. Lucas looked so much like David that it brought tears of joy to my eyes. "Lucas, you're so full of life," I said. As Lucas grew, his interests became clear. He was always looking up at the sky, searching for airplanes. And at home, he was so engrossed in airplane books that Amy complained he wouldn't even eat. When I gave Lucas a tour airplane, his eyes lit up. "Wow, an airplane. That's not how you say it. Airplane." Amy worked hard to teach little Lucas the correct pronunciation, even though he was just learning to speak. "It's fine, he's only 3. He'll get it eventually," I reassured her. "But if he falls behind, it'll be a problem. Lucas is going to be a pilot, after all." She often reminded Lucas of this while he played with his toy airplane, saying, "You're going to be a pilot." Perhaps due to her encouragement, by the time Lucas entered elementary school, he started saying, "I want to be a pilot when I grow up." Flight to Kuala Lumpur. Lucas would shout, running around with his toy airplane, full of energy. Even Amy would correct him. "It's pronounced Kuala Lumpur," and I marveled at how he managed to remember such a complex word. Lucas often made adorable mistakes when talking about airplanes, but he kept watching related videos and expanding his knowledge. Amy seemed quite proud of this. "He just talks about different types of airplanes all day." I'm really excited about his future. He seemed to be doing well in school, too, consistently achieving top grades. If everything stayed on track, he might actually become a pilot someday. I believed it, and so did David and Amy. But shortly after moving up to the 4th grade, Lucas started refusing to go to school. I listened in surprise as David and Amy came to me for advice. He says it's not because of any trouble with friends or bullying. David looked visibly confused. Amy appeared anxious as well. "He just says studying isn't fun anymore. I thought about enrolling him in a tutoring center, but he doesn't want that either. But if his grades are good, how can studying not be enjoyable?" I found it puzzling. Apparently, Lucas spent most of his time in his room, looking through airplane encyclopedias or reading related books. Amy said she would sternly tell him, "Stop looking at airplanes and focus on your schoolwork," and even take his books away. A little before the long school break, Lucas visited my house several times. David's house is about a 30-minute bus ride from mine. "Grandma, listen. The other day, I saw a plane flying over there in the sky." He enthusiastically described the color, shape, and how it was probably heading to Los Angeles International Airport, all while sketching an airplane in his notebook. His drawings were incredibly detailed, down to the national flags painted on the planes. "That's impressive." I expressed my amazement, and he beamed with pride. "You should show these to your friends and teachers at school." But as soon as I said that, his expression darkened. "No, school is boring." That was all he said before returning to his sketchbook. As the long break began, he came to my house more often, looking visibly relieved. He said it was nice not being told by David and Amy to go to school. However, when the break ended and school resumed, he stayed home. Seeing him unwilling to attend school no matter what, I sought advice from a nearby friend. I worried about his future without opportunities to interact with others. At the very least, He needed to engage with kids his age and his teachers. That's when I learned about alternative schools. I gathered some pamphlets and suggested them to David and Amy. I thought it was a great idea and shared it confidently, but their reactions were far from positive. That won't work. Lucas needs to be an elite achiever. Exactly. Alternative schools are just play centers. They're not suitable for him. What? Margaret, please stop interfering. He will go back to regular school. No matter how many times we talked, neither of us could change our minds. And we kept clashing, even though I said I would make him go. It's been nearly 6 months since he stopped attending school. If forcing him to go was an option, it wouldn't have been this difficult. I had tried several times to persuade him to consider another approach, but it was all in vain. Am I the only one truly thinking about what's best for Lucas? On my desk, brochures for alternative schools lay scattered, looking rather forlorn. Autumn was deepening, and stores were starting to display blankets and other winter items. The town was preparing for the colder season. One day, Lucas came rushing into my house, wearing far too little for the chilly weather. Hot on his heels, Amy came running, with a frantic look on her face. Lucas, enough of this nonsense. No, I'm not going to school, ever, ever, ever. When I asked what was going on, it turned out to be the result of something that had happened a few days prior. He had left home around 9 a.m., saying he was heading to school. I was relieved, thinking Lucas had finally started going to school, but when I called yesterday, the school told me he hadn't been showing up. Lucas averted his gaze, and when I asked him, he said he'd been going to Margaret's house instead. It was true. I had noticed him coming to my house more often these past few days. He stood shivering, wincing from the cold, hiding behind me as he nervously glanced at Amy. It's because Margaret spoils him. How are you going to take responsibility for this? It felt unfair to be blamed for this situation. If anyone should apologize for lying about his whereabouts, it was Lucas. Lucas, you know it's wrong to lie, but Mom gets mad at me. Amy's face turned bright red as she scolded Lucas. That's enough. Let's go. Come on now. When she grabbed Lucas's thin arm and tried to pull him along, I quickly intervened. Amy, don't be so rough with him. Margaret, stay out of this. Amy dragged a sobbing Lucas home. This sort of thing happened repeatedly, with me trying to calm Amy down or comfort Lucas each time. I'd heard that even if she seemed to listen at the moment, she would later lash out at him. Because of this, I eventually found it hard to say anything to her. At the same time, Amy started asking me to handle school events on her behalf, leaving even the teachers troubled. As I was pondering what to do, Lucas handed me his tablet. Grandma, I want to read this. It was an e-book, a specialized text about airplanes, meant for adults. It seems really difficult. Lucas slightly pouted and whispered, but I want to read it. These days, he absorbed everything he could about airplanes. He would watch TV programs and read magazine features, even taking notes diligently. Knowing this, I decided to buy the book for him, thinking it might fuel his interests. He spent the entire day staring at the tablet screen, engrossed in the e-book. He wouldn't touch schoolwork, yet his passion for airplanes was remarkable. And yet, after finishing that book, he wanted to dive into another one. And then he asked to visit the airport. As I continued to indulge his fascination with airplanes, I came to realize something. He wasn't struggling with school because he lacked intelligence. If anything, he absorbed information so quickly that he couldn't adjust to the pace of a traditional classroom. Why didn't I notice this sooner? No wonder he resisted going to school. Once I understood this, I stopped pressuring him to attend school or even alternative programs. I decided to let him pursue his interests as much as he wanted. Of course, David and Amy had plenty to say about it, but I brushed it all off. Time flew by, and Lucas turned 14. At an age when most kids are in middle school attending classes, he spent his days reading every book, manual, and even international papers about airplanes. People asked if I was worried, but I wasn't. I trusted him completely. Around that time, David received an offer for an overseas assignment. He excitedly shared the news, and I was genuinely happy for him. "Oh, that's perfect. Lucas has been wanting to learn Spanish," I said. I suggested that David take Lucas along, but he frowned and shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I have no intention of taking Lucas." I was stunned by his response. Amy, overhearing the conversation, agreed with him. "But wouldn't Lucas feel abandoned if you leave without him? What's your plan? He's a failure. He doesn't even go to school properly and spends all his time obsessing over airplanes. It's unbelievable. All he does is stay holed up in his room. We don't even know what he's doing in there. He's nowhere near elite, and taking him overseas would be impossible." With that, they decided to leave Lucas in my care. He's attached to Margaret anyway, so it works out fine. Take care of Lucas for us, okay? They left after saying those words. I sat in the living room, stunned, my mind racing about how to break this to Lucas. If I told him the truth, it would devastate him at such a sensitive age. Knowing his parents had essentially abandoned him would surely break his heart. "Grandma," about what I just heard. I turned at the sound of his voice, only to see Lucas standing there with a sorrowful expression. "Lucas, you overheard us." He nodded. The door was open. He said, "So I'm being left behind. Dad and Mom aren't coming back, are they?" The distress in his voice made it clear how much the situation had shaken him. "Lucas, Dad, and Mom. Grandma, am I going to be all alone?" Tears welled up in his eyes as he spoke. The pain of hearing him say such things was unbearable. Lucas seemed to understand, in his way, what his parents had decided. Holding back my own tears, I said, "Don't worry. Dad and Mom are just going far away for work. They'll come back as soon as it's over." "Really? Are you sure?" "Yes. Until then, you and I will stay here together. It'll be just fine." I noticed, albeit faintly, a glimmer of hope in his eyes at that moment. "Yeah, I'll do that. I'll live with Grandma." After that, David and Amy flew overseas. They sent me a picture from the airport with the message, "We're off." Using an overseas assignment as an excuse to leave Lucas behind must have been convenient for them. I couldn't help but feel a little annoyed at how carefree they seemed about leaving Lucas. "All right, I'll make sure Lucas is happy." I whispered this to myself, making a firm decision. They entrusted Lucas to me but made it clear they had no intention of providing financial support or child-rearing expenses. They even suggested I use Kevin's inheritance, as if it were their decision to make. Of course, I intended to do so, but there were limits, and I had no choice but to work. I looked for a cleaning job suitable for someone my age, and worked diligently 3 to 4 days a week. Previously, I used to enjoy leisurely gatherings with neighborhood friends, but now I couldn't coordinate my schedule with theirs. Most of my income went toward Lucas's education. I wanted to invest in anything that piqued his interest or any place he wanted to go. Eventually, he expressed a desire to attend an alternative school, not just to study Spanish, but I want to make friends too. I was genuinely surprised when he said this. However, I quickly agreed and pulled out brochures from alternative schools, considering which might be the best fit. Each school had different philosophies, so I looked for one that would align with his aspirations. Lucas, too, set clear goals for himself, poring over brochures and attending open houses on his own. He chose one from several options and began attending. As he went to the alternative school, he caught up on his studies and seemed to be thriving. I felt relieved seeing him so engaged. He absorbed knowledge rapidly and soon grew to a level where he could consider taking high school entrance exams. There were minor rebellious phases, but they were mostly trivial, and I didn't pay much attention to them. After a year at the alternative school, he made friends and often studied with them at the library, helping each other out. "Grandma, can I bring some friends over today? We want to study together." "Of course. I'll bring you all some snacks." "No, don't. That's embarrassing." Watching him blush yet look delighted reminded me of David when he was in high school. David had his moments like this too, and I was suddenly struck by nostalgia. At the same time, I instinctively knew a day would come when I would have to see Lucas off, just like I had with David. That thought brought a slight pang of loneliness. David was likely working hard in his overseas post. Since David and Amy left for their assignment, I had been sending regular updates about Lucas, but they never responded. Did they not worry about him? Calling them indifferent felt accurate, but also too harsh. Over time, my updates became less frequent, and by the time Lucas started at the alternative school, I had stopped contacting them entirely. 15 years had passed since David and Amy left for their overseas assignment. I found myself alone at the airport, gazing out the window. Planes were coming and going, carrying people and luggage in an endless rhythm. I couldn't help but imagine Lucas on one of those planes, waving back at me from a distance. He's supposed to be back today, right? I checked my smartphone for messages, brimming with anticipation. What kind of stories would he have to tell? What kind of sights had he seen? Lost in these thoughts, I was startled by a familiar voice calling my name. "Margaret, is that you?" Turning around, I found David and Amy standing there, looking quite exhausted. It was such a coincidence to meet them here. Had they returned today as well? "David, Amy, you're back. You could have at least let me know." I said it casually, surprised at how little emotion I actually felt in the moment. But they didn't seem to care, answering plainly, "Yo, we are." Overseas was amazing, honestly. I wish we could have stayed longer, but the main office called us back. David's tone had shifted from a tired murmur to something bright and animated. Amy, too, appeared a bit fuller than before, as if she'd been enjoying life with good food and ease. Letting their chatter wash over me, I checked the time, wondering when Lucas would finally appear. "So, Margaret, who are you waiting for? Don't tell me you've found a boyfriend at your age," David asked with a sly grin, making Amy laugh as well. "Come on, that's a bit much." "Margaret, how old are you now?" "Let's see, I'm 52, so 75. But never mind that. Don't you two have anything else to say?" I replied firmly, watching their amused expressions turn to boredom. Their faces practically spelled out, "She just doesn't get jokes." Something else to say? Not really. Nothing at all. "You abandoned Lucas and don't even feel a thing about it?" I pressed them. I brought up how they'd brushed off my attempts to contact them after they left for their overseas assignment. I reminded them of the cruel names they'd called Lucas, including failure. "Well, we left everything about Lucas in your capable hands." What more could we add? Exactly. Did we really call him a failure? Don't remember saying that. They exchanged smug smiles, their words as dismissive as their attitudes. "Margaret, are you looking for an apology about Lucas?" "I'm not asking for an apology. I just want to know what you really feel." At that, They burst out laughing. When they finally settled, David spoke up. Is he still holed up in his room? Their laughter reignited, doubling over as if the idea were the funniest thing in the world. How could they say such awful things about their own child, thinking they could get away with anything since Lucas wasn't here? It was unthinkable to me, someone who'd been by his side all along. Clenching my fists tightly, I was filled with the urge to shout at them. But this wasn't the place for a scene, so I held back, glaring at them instead. Enough is enough. I was just about to say it when I noticed something. A man was walking up behind David and Amy. My eyes widened as I focused on him, and he smiled, waving warmly in my direction. Grandma, I'm home. The one dressed in a crisp flight uniform was Lucas. He was now fully utilizing his natural talents as a pilot, confidently taking to the skies. His growth was evident in his radiant smile and the self-assured look on his face. Lucas walked past David and Amy without even a glance. It was as if they didn't exist, his eyes fixed only on me as he approached. I'm so glad you came. Here, I brought you something. He pulled out several postcards from his bag. They were vibrant and adorable, featuring designs you wouldn't typically see in America. He must have picked them up during his travels. Oh my, these are lovely. Thank you so much. Though Lucas had grown taller than me, his smile was just like it had been when he was a child. Watching him, it was David and Amy who seemed most surprised. Pointing at Lucas, they exclaimed with delight, "Is that really you, Lucas? You've grown so much. It's been forever. How have you been? Did you bring us anything?" They spoke as though they had forgotten everything that had happened. Lucas cast them a glance, then quickly turned away as if they were strangers. He gestured for me to leave with him. When David and Amy realized Lucas was ignoring them, they erupted in anger. "Hey, I'm your mom. You remember that, right? How dare you ignore your parents? What kind of upbringing leads to this, Margaret? What have you been teaching him?" Claiming to be his parents now, of all times, Lucas turned back to face them. "You never acted like parents, not even once. Grandma is my mom." With firm resolve, he took my hand and said, "Let's go. I'm flying to Germany next." "Oh, already? You're such a brilliant pilot." As he started walking, I followed alongside him. He seemed to slow his pace slightly, matching it to mine. He spoke excitedly about the views from the cockpit, making me feel as if I were soaring alongside him. I glanced back briefly, wondering why David and Amy weren't following. What? They stood there, stunned, their expressions shifting to frustration as they began shouting, "Lucas, Margaret, don't just walk away. Unbelievable. Say something, anything." Neither Lucas nor I paid them any attention, nor did we stop. A few days later, as I relaxed at home, the doorbell rang. When I answered, David and Amy stood there, looking flustered. David had a troubled expression. "Something's wrong. Listen to me. It's serious." After leaving the airport, David had apparently gone to the main office. I recalled him mentioning being summoned there. "They're saying there were problems with the work I was handling at my assignment, and now they want me to take responsibility." "What do you mean?" "In other words, they're asking me to resign." I struggled to grasp how severe the issues must have been to lead to this. It was likely not one or two incidents, but a culmination of problems. Considering David's age, finding a new job after this would be a significant challenge. "Margaret, please, help us reconcile with Lucas. And then, tell Lucas to support us financially." David and Amy seemed to recall that Lucas had become a pilot, and now wanted him to use his income to support them. I was stunned and irritated by their incredibly self-centered request. leaving me momentarily speechless. As they continued to push closer, I felt nothing but growing disgust toward them. Do you even realize what you're saying? He's our son. It's his duty to take care of us. Exactly. Don't you think it's heartless, Margaret, to let Lucas abandon us like this? Amy's words pushed me to my limit. Heartless? You're calling yourselves heartless, right? You're the ones who abandoned him first, I said, recalling the events of 15 years ago. I won't mediate anything between you and Lucas. Handle it yourselves. As I firmly stated this, both of them exploded in anger, acting high and mighty. Margaret, you're not even Lucas's mom, so stay out of it. Yay, and stop pretending like you're not also counting on his income. They continued ranting, calling me cruel, a fake trying to play mom, and every other insult they could muster. I decided to let them say whatever they wanted, thinking they would eventually leave. But then they said something unforgivable that made me feel like the air had been knocked out of me. Frankly, you and I aren't even related by blood. I've always felt burdened being treated like family. What? I tolerated it until I graduated college. To me, you were just someone who paid the bills. The shocking confession left me bewildered. Memories of cooking his meals, escorting him to his high school entrance exams, and cheering at his sports games came flooding back. All those acts of kindness I had done out of genuine love. I had devoted myself to ensuring his growth after Kevin's early death. Yet to him, it had all been a nuisance. Unable to meet his eyes, I stood frozen in shock. Just then, the door unexpectedly opened, and Lucas walked in. We had planned to have dinner together tonight for the first time in a while. But now he stood there, trembling with rage, glaring at David. Dad, what do you mean by that? Is it true? David, undeterred, turned to face Lucas. Lucas, perfect timing. We were just talking about you. Look, we're family, aren't we? David insisted, emphasizing that their blood connection made them true family, which is why I'm asking for something. You see, we need, Dad, stop saying ridiculous things, Lucas said, his tone thick with anger. Grandma raised you, even though you weren't her blood. How dare you say something like that? Apologize to her. Lucas shouted at David with a fury I had never seen before. Blood doesn't matter. Someone who says otherwise isn't my family. What did you just say? Lucas, how can you say that? You're our son. Amy's voice trembled, but Lucas turned his gaze to her with even more anger. I'm not your son anymore. I've become Grandma's adopted child. David and Amy were left stunned by his words, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. Their jaws seemed to drop so wide that they might never close again. But Lucas continued, Listen, I have no intention of taking care of you or lending you money. Get out, right now. No way. Lucas, are you brainwashed by Margaret or something? Amy, still trying to argue, was immediately cut off by Lucas. This is my decision. Both of you leave. Overwhelmed by Lucas's intensity, David and Amy had no choice but to leave the house. As I watched their dazed figures walking away, I wondered if I was dreaming. I thanked him and enjoyed a peaceful dinner that evening. Years passed after David and Amy had forced their way into our home. Since that day, I hadn't seen them, but I was shocked when they suddenly showed up again. This time, they weren't just distressed, they were crying. Though I had no interest in listening, David began speaking anyway. I feel so out of place at work. He explained that although he had been told to take responsibility for a situation, he managed to apologize and keep his job. However, he had been frequently transferred and left without meaningful work in an attempt to redeem himself. he got involved in a new project. At first, things seemed to go well, but David, confident in his past experience abroad, pushed forward in a way he thought would work. But this was an American company. Unsurprisingly, his approach backfired, earning him cold stares from his colleagues and subordinates. Eventually, David found himself completely isolated. By the time he realized it, the project had been wrapped up without him. Since then, he had been sidelined at his current job, and now he was on the verge of being forced to resign. But that wasn't all. Amy had been spending recklessly, and had even accumulated debt. I never thought it would come to this. David always said everything was fine, so I believed him. Still, why did you go into debt? I didn't have a choice. We needed the money. I had no words for their story. I simply stared at the two of them. Margaret, could you arrange for us to talk to Lucas one more time, just once? David begged, saying he genuinely wanted to speak with Lucas this time. I thought about it. What could Lucas possibly say to them at this point? Learning that his estranged parents had lost their jobs and were now in debt wouldn't change anything for Lucas. I had reached my limit with their attempts to interfere in Lucas's life. Stop trying to involve Lucas in your mess. You need to live your own lives. You're adults, be independent. But, are you seriously going to keep pushing? I'll call the police. I grabbed my smartphone and started dialing. Panicked, David and Amy quickly fled. As I watched their retreating figures, I firmly shut the front door. I locked it and finally felt at ease. Since that incident, I haven't heard a word from them. I decided to assume that they were managing on their own somewhere and didn't reach out to them myself. After all, they said I was a burden, so there was no need to concern myself unnecessarily. Still, I occasionally received news about them from somewhere. Rumor had it that David had changed jobs. For someone over 50, I was surprised he found a new position. However, it seemed like the transition was a failure, as he was now being pushed into unfamiliar field work. For someone used to desk work, it must be an incredibly tough job. How long he could last was anyone's guess. I also heard that Amy was working part-time at a supermarket. A neighbor who happened to see her shared this with me. She looked worn out, working in a simple, cheap shirt, appearing drained of energy. It was probably her way of repaying the debts she had accumulated, which seemed like a natural consequence. Together, the two of them seemed to be a mess, and I sighed deeply at the thought. As for me, I had quit my cleaning job some time ago and spent my days meeting with nearby friends. At our age, most conversations revolved around illnesses or injuries. Even so, we laughed and made plans for the coming year. I also had another worry. What if David and Amy showed up again? To prepare, I installed a security camera at the front door, but it mostly just caught neighborhood cats passing by. Still, I couldn't quite calm my mind. One day, I shared this concern with Lucas, and after thinking for a moment, he said, "Why don't you move? Maybe to a high-rise apartment with better security." But I don't have that kind of money. I'll cover it. Grandma, your peace of mind is worth every penny. Take care of yourself and save your money. After several discussions, we finally decided to sell the house and move. It was a home filled with memories, but once it was sold, it surprisingly felt freeing. The only regret was not being able to join the neighborhood gatherings anymore. I was at a loss for words when they expressed their sadness, but we promised to meet once a year for a trip. He purchased a unit in a high-rise apartment for me and handled all the procedures. In that area, there was little chance of running into David or Amy, and shopping became much easier. "If you ever need anything, just let me know," he said with a confident smile. I felt like he had already done enough for me, and there was nothing more I could ask for. If I could wish for one thing, it would be to attend Lucas's wedding. Perhaps that's asking for too much, I murmured to myself as I opened my journal and reminisced. As I flipped through the pages, my hand paused. I had written about the day Lucas boarded a plane for the first time as a pilot, the day I patted his back, encouraging him as he looked nervous. From the boy who only stared at airplane illustrations, he had grown into someone truly admirable. Whenever Lucas took a long vacation, he always took me on trips. He called it paying back, saying we could go anywhere, domestic or overseas. Most of the time, we stayed within the country, but one day, I asked him, "Don't you have a girlfriend?" Lucas smiled awkwardly and said, "Actually," showing me his smartphone screen. There was a woman with a warm, gentle smile looking back at me.
Stay out of the way, older lady, and just celebrate Christmas there. It seems that after being invited to spend the Christmas vacation together, Margaret has been kicked out of the house. First things first, I need to tell Jeffrey about Margaret's true nature. Somehow, I'll expose Margaret's facade. I refuse to be family with someone like her. I am Michelle, 72 years old, living with my son, Jeffrey. That's because Jeffrey is nearing 40, still single, and my husband passed away 3 years ago. Jeffrey used to live alone, but he moved back home when he changed jobs, and it was closer to his workplace. Our current house is a single story, which might look new at a glance, but was actually remodeled a while ago. It used to be a nearly broken down place, but we remodeled it on my husband's insistence due to years of deterioration and poor fittings. As a result, the remodeled house has become comfortable and clean. From this perspective, my husband seemed like a family-loving man who decided to remodel for our comfort, but in reality, it wasn't so, and he was a source of long-term trouble. He was a traditional, stubborn man outside, but free-spirited. At home, he acted as if he was the center, imposing his rules, and would berate me if I deviated slightly from what he wanted. His favorite phrase was, "Who do you think provides the food here?" However, he was out playing poker, horse racing, and casinos, leaving us with barely enough to live on. Still, he acted arrogantly in front of me and Jeffrey. He would cancel family outings for poker or miss school events, not just once or twice. I could have divorced him and raised Jeffrey alone, but I refused to be defeated and stayed until the end. Jeffrey, too, endured silently in front of his father, never showing tears. My husband left us with a small inheritance, this remodeled house, and, most importantly, my dear Jeffrey, when he passed away from illness. For me, having my beloved son means I'm not lonely. Jeffrey, unlike his father, has always been kind from a young age. He's selflessly caring and can't ignore someone in trouble, but he's also self-sacrificing, hesitant to express his opinions, and tends to be swayed by others. I'll never be like my father. He has often put himself in difficult situations to help others. He once lent his notes to a classmate, never got them back, and his test results suffered. Despite wanting to join a club he liked, he ended up in one he wasn't interested in because a friend asked him. My friend said he wouldn't know anyone else in the club, so he asked me to join with him. Despite his selfless nature, I worry his excessive kindness might lead him into trouble someday. His current workplace has a good environment, but it's mostly male, with little talk about women. Now that my husband is gone, I'd be alone if Jeffrey marries. Though it would be lonely, I hoped he would meet a wonderful woman and start a family. Then one day, Jeffrey made a sudden confession. I've promised to marry someone. I want her to meet you, Mom. I was overjoyed, almost jumping up. Jeffrey, nearing 40, working among men, commuting between work and home, living with his mother, he's not the most sought-after type. That a woman wants to marry him is such a joy. If things go smoothly, and Jeffrey marries her, he will of course leave my side. It would be a lie to say I wouldn't feel lonely, but as a mother wishing for Jeffrey's happiness, I couldn't be happier.
If you've chosen her, I definitely want to meet her. What's she like?
She's a hardworking woman I met at a party a senior took me to 6 months ago. She has the strength and resilience to overcome tough times, which made me think we could build a home together. That's why I want to introduce her to you, Mom. Jeffrey's eyes sparkled as he spoke, a look I had never seen before. If Jeffrey speaks of a woman with such eyes, she must be a wonderful lady. I was looking forward to meeting the woman Jeffrey confidently chose. Then, on the promised day, Jeffrey brought his girlfriend home. Mom, this is Margaret, the woman I've been dating and considering marrying. However, the woman Jeffrey brought neither introduced herself nor nodded in greeting, just stood there silently. At first glance, she seemed haughty and cold. Honestly, she wasn't the type I imagined Jeffrey would fall for. She continued to ignore everything as if nothing happened. Barely greeting, and just surveyed the house. She sipped the tea I offered with disgust, wiping everything she touched with disinfectant wipes, a series of odd behaviors. At the very least, it's clear these aren't actions one should take on a first meeting with a future mother-in-law. Having only Jeffrey, I secretly dreamed of doting on my daughter-in-law like my own child, but that dream seemed to shatter in an instant. Frankly, I felt uncomfortable in such a short time and didn't want to get too close, even if she was Jeffrey's choice and a future daughter-in-law. It seemed she felt the same, as the days passed without any contact. After Margaret left, I confronted Jeffrey. You're dating Margaret and want to marry her, right? From today's encounter, I can't see her appeal.
Margaret's shy around new people. But she's charming, strong, and kind, having overcome tough times.
It turned out they met at a party hosted by a coworker. Margaret had been talking endlessly about her hardships and sorrows near Jeffrey. Normally, such pity stories at a party would be unbearable, but Jeffrey felt sorry for her and wanted to save her. Their relationship started with his resolve to make Margaret happy. Whatever the beginning, I thought it was typical Jeffrey, but when it comes to dating and marriage, it is not a simple matter. However, considering today's behavior and how they met, she seemed like a complicated person. In a relationship, she might appear cute. But I had a feeling it would be difficult if they lived together. One day, Jeffrey suddenly said he was moving out. Probably because of Margaret. Thinking about living with that woman I met briefly, I watched Jeffrey with mixed feelings. Then Jeffrey murmured quietly, I didn't expect Margaret to go ahead with it at this time. We talked about deciding on a date and making a commitment as a couple.
What do you mean, go ahead with? You don't mean...
The marriage application. She submitted it alone just before noon today. It seemed unreal, but apparently, Margaret couldn't wait and submitted the marriage application by herself, binding them as a couple without Jeffrey knowing. Considering the first impression, the stories from Jeffrey, and this unilateral action, I felt nothing but anxiety.
I'm worried. Are you sure it's okay?
It's fine. Margaret is a kind woman. Oh, I got a message from Margaret. She wants you to choose your wedding gift from these options. When I checked the items Margaret had sent, they were all worth several $1,000s. Even for my son's wedding, that's not an amount I can easily afford. Margaret's actions showing such rudeness upon meeting, submitting a marriage application without Jeffrey's knowledge to become a couple, and then demanding ultra-expensive home appliances were simply too audacious. It was surprising that Jeffrey chose someone like her as a life partner, but to celebrate his new beginning, I decided to gift them a state-of-the-art, high-performance air conditioner. Margaret wants this air conditioner, so I guess this will be my wedding gift to you too, all right?
Mom, thank you. I appreciate you listening to Margaret's request.
It wasn't cheap for me either, but I splurged for the sake of Jeffrey and his beloved's new life. Even after installing the air conditioner Margaret wanted, I received neither thanks nor any contact from her. Is this how people are nowadays? Time passed without any particular communication from Jeffrey or Margaret. They were living in an apartment in the next town, less than an hour's drive from my house, but I heard nothing from them. It's not too far for a visit, but they must be busy with work and their newlywed life, I thought, so I refrained from contacting them. However, a situation arose where I had to reach out. My brother, Jeffrey's uncle, had passed away. He was an uncle to Jeffrey, too, who had loved him when he was a little boy, although he was in contact with him less frequently now. Jeffrey was fond of him as a child, and I wanted him to attend the funeral, even if he couldn't make it to the wake. Having not spoken for a while, I wanted to hear his voice and called. But no matter how many times I called Jeffrey's mobile, it wouldn't connect. Even worse, when I tried the next day, I got a message saying the call couldn't be connected. It seemed like I was blocked. The kind Jeffrey, who always stayed in touch over small matters, blocking me. Hard to believe, but with no way to contact him and the funeral not waiting. It proceeded without the Jeffrey couple. Half a year later, Margaret suddenly contacted me. Michelle might be lonely this summer, and Jeffrey has a middle school reunion around the end of the year, so he wants to let loose. Can we spend Christmas vacation at your place? She brought up spending Christmas at my house, without mentioning the wedding gift or the blocked calls during the funeral. To her, maybe those incidents weren't a big deal. It seemed Margaret didn't even consider the possibility of me refusing. Despite my reservations about spending time under the same roof as Margaret, I agreed, hoping to see Jeffrey after so long. Sure, that's fine. I look forward to seeing you both. It's been a while. Then at Christmas, they visited my house. There was a slight discomfort with them around. They were always together. Not in a lovey-dovey or happy way, just together. Margaret followed Jeffrey even to the bathroom or when he needed to fetch something. At first, I thought she had business in the same direction, but it seemed not. It might sound harsh, but Margaret's gaze and movements suggested she was monitoring Jeffrey, ensuring he didn't do anything unusual. I was shocked when I caught a glimpse of Jeffrey's face as I stood up to serve tea. Jeffrey was looking down, avoiding eye contact with Margaret. I struggled to understand why they were in such a situation. But the reason for their behavior would become clear later. In the evening, Jeffrey left for his middle school reunion. Feeling awkward alone with Margaret, I stood up to clean. As usual, I started vacuuming, but suddenly the vacuum cleaner stopped.
Why? It was working fine yesterday.
At that moment, with a loud bang and a strong impact, I found myself knocked over. In the moment, I couldn't grasp what was happening, but I was kicked out into the garden along with the vacuum cleaner. Luckily, I was wearing thick socks, but with the snow outside, I'd freeze if I stayed there. Who would do this? A suspicious person? A burglar? As I tried to get up, I saw it was Margaret who had thrown out the vacuum cleaner and me. Older lady, celebrating Christmas out here suits you.
What? Wait, Margaret, do you realize what you're doing? Shut up, older lady. I'm looking forward to fun times while he's gone. It'll be a great night without you in the way, so don't interfere.
Saying that, Margaret started making a phone call to someone. Apparently a man, judging by the name she called. Her flirting voice and the way she spoke suggested she was planning to meet a lover in this house. Indeed, the house was newly remodeled and minimalistic, thanks to me, but who would think to use their mother-in-law's house, where their husband grew up, to cheat? Margaret, it seemed, was the type to kick out her mother-in-law and bring her lover over, taking advantage of Jeffrey's absence. Margaret is the kind of person who would take advantage of her husband going to a reunion and kick me, her mother-in-law, out of the way because I was in the way and kick me into the snowy yard. Well, I had a plan too. I put on an old pair of shoes and a jacket from the shed and decided to fight back. Firstly, I doubted Jeffrey knew about the affair. Even Jeffrey, who is kindness personified, would surely react if he knew his beloved wife was cheating on him. I needed to contact Jeffrey immediately and have him witness the affair about to happen in this house. But since my calls were blocked on Jeffrey's mobile, I needed a different approach. That's when I thought of Jeffrey's childhood friend. They had been close through college and often dined together even after graduating. The friend ran a delicatessen inherited from their parents in the local shopping district. I headed there, desperately hoping for some information. At the delicatessen, I found his parents, who said he might be at a reunion at a pub in the same shopping district. I rushed to the pub, and luckily, I headed to the pub with the anecdote that it was a small pub and that Jeffrey would be easily recognizable if he was there. I caught Jeffrey returning from a convenience store. Good timing. Margaret kicked me out of the house. She's planning to spend time with some man there. I heard her talking on the phone. Do you know anything about this?
What? Margaret cheating? No way!
Jeffrey immediately left the reunion and headed to my house. I wanted to go too, but he said it was too dangerous since we didn't know who the man was and asked me to stay away. I hid in a nearby business hotel, leaving the matter between Jeffrey and his wife to him. The next day, when I returned home, I found Margaret beaten up in the garden, naked.
Older lady. Don't you care to help your daughter-in-law? I can't even get into the house. How did you raise your son?
I couldn't believe the gentle Jeffrey would beat his wife to such an extent and leave her in the garden. Entering the house, I found Jeffrey drinking coffee.
Margaret is naked in the garden. What happened? I don't know. She was arguing with her lover last night, so maybe that's it? She's going to be nothing to me now, so it's not my business.
While I took refuge in the business hotel, Jeffrey had confronted Margaret and her lover at the scene of their affair. Thinking it might serve as evidence, he took photos of the lover's face and even recorded the encounter. I was impressed by his calmness in such a bizarre situation. From the recording, it seemed the lover, not expecting Jeffrey's return, lashed out at Margaret in anger. The recording also captured the lover stripping Margaret of her expensive-looking branded clothes, apparently intending to sell them. After the lover left, it was Jeffrey who stopped Margaret from re-entering the house.
I think you understand from the recording, Margaret isn't repentant. She married me for money and convenience, and she keeps saying her lover is her #1 priority. I have to step out for a bit, so I'll leave Margaret's matter to you, Mom.
Leave it to me? What do you mean?
I didn't want such a person in my house, so I didn't let her in. If Mom wants to let her in, I won't stop you.
With that, Jeffrey left. As far as I was concerned, my daughter-in-law had been awful to me. And now she had gotten her just desserts. I felt no obligation to help her for no reason and decided to leave her as she was. Although Jeffrey's photos and recording gave me a good idea of the situation, I decided to check the security camera footage for a clearer picture. I was thankful I had installed the cameras after hearing about a burglary at a relative's house. Neither Margaret nor her lover seemed to realize their actions were being recorded in someone else's house, causing trouble. While examining the footage and photos, I noticed something familiar about the lover's unusual hat. As I was pondering this, the noise outside caught my attention, accompanied by the doorbell. When I opened the door, there was a police officer. It turned out Margaret had played the victim to the neighbors, leading to a report of an injured, naked woman in the garden. Sorry for the disturbance, officer. Margaret got involved in some trouble, but neither Jeffrey nor I saw her get injured. We have security cameras, so we can explain what kind of trouble it was. I shared the events of the previous night, along with the evidence from the cameras and photos. The police seemed to understand that Jeffrey and I were not involved. However, they couldn't leave an injured, naked woman in the garden in the middle of winter. Margaret was taken away in a police car. Suddenly, I remembered who the man in Jeffrey's photos of the lover was. Just then, Jeffrey returned. Mom, I'm back. I filed for divorce. Margaret and I are now complete strangers.
Divorce? What do you mean?
Margaret has been throwing tantrums when things don't go her way since we got married. I've tried to meet her expectations, but at some point, she started using a pre-filled divorce form as a threat. Jeffrey, having fallen for Margaret, had tried to fulfill her wishes. But Margaret exploited his willingness, acting tyrannically. When things didn't go her way, she used the divorce form as leverage. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. But then I remembered something and shared it with Jeffrey, who suddenly stood up with an idea, leading me to the police station where Margaret was being temporarily held. Waited for you, Jeffrey. I knew you'd come. You're my dear husband, not heartless enough to ignore your wife in this state.
What are you saying? We're strangers now. I just came to tell you something with Mom. What do you mean? A bad joke? I understand this older lady coming to apologize, but strangers?
Margaret must have thought Jeffrey was coming to rescue his beloved wife and expected me to apologize for leaving her in the garden. I submitted the divorce papers with your section filled out, Margaret. We're no longer a couple.
What? What are you doing, Jeffrey?
Remember when you submitted the marriage application without permission? It's too convenient that it's okay when you do it to others, but not when it's done to you, right? Margaret was speechless at Jeffrey's logical argument, but I had something to say too. That man you brought home, he's a business owner, right?
Yes. He's a young, talented owner of a beauty salon. He proposed with a bouquet of roses last week, saying he'd make me a CEO's wife.
That man's actually an unemployed freeloader who caused trouble at a restaurant, leading to his unemployment. I often browse social media, and recently saw a story about someone causing a scene in a restaurant. I thought I had seen him somewhere before, but he was in the vortex of a topic that has recently come under fire by many people. I read that this guy was repeatedly getting in trouble for drinking straight from a pitcher of water, putting Tabasco in it, and other such nuisances. I read that he was recently fired from his part-time job.
That's a lie. His profile had a long list of accomplishments. He wouldn't do such things.
Well, regardless, my house has a lot of damage from his tantrum. I could file a report for the nuisance. Margaret, convinced she'd become a CEO's wife, was in for more shocks. In order to push Margaret to the edge, we decided to fold in even more. Also, one of your company's executives is a longtime friend of mine.
What? You told my workplace about the affair.
I didn't reveal the affair. I just discussed your relationship history with Jeffrey. Any problem with that? It's better not to do things you'd be embarrassed to be seen doing. Shocked by the cascade of revelations, Margaret turned pale. Leaving her behind, I exited the police station. Later, Margaret's mistreatment of me and her affair led to her divorce becoming public at her workplace. She was a long-time employee due for a promotion. But her actions caused her to lose that opportunity. Her terrible behavior led to her being transferred to another region, where everyone knew about her worst ending due to her infidelity.
Why is everyone avoiding me? I was just in a pure romance with a talented CEO. Are they jealous of me? Who could have been a CEO's wife? Tell that friend of yours on the board to stop this stupid workplace bullying. You think you're being ostracized and bullied just because you're out of place after being transferred? That's a naive way of thinking. There's nothing I can do about it.
Sorry. Eventually, Margaret had nowhere to belong at work and ended up resigning. And worse, she became homeless.
How can you leave me, your ex-daughter-in-law, without a home in the winter? Isn't it heartless to have a woman shiver outside? What are you saying? Who kicked Mom out into the snow-covered garden? You're only thinking of yourself. Your words and actions don't match.
The apartment where Jeffrey and Margaret lived was a company housing for married employees, so Margaret was evicted due to the divorce. Despite this, Margaret, not giving up, repeatedly harassed Jeffrey.
You're there, aren't you? How can you not help your wife in trouble? Don't you have any kindness? You expect kindness from others while ignoring your own actions? But I guess explaining this is useless.
Not satisfied with harassing Jeffrey, Margaret also came to my place, even following me to the supermarket.
Can you leave your daughter-in-law in this situation? Would you do the same to your son? Your son abandoned his troubled wife.
Abandoned?
Troubled daughter-in-law? You brought this upon yourself. Remember your actions? I don't consider you a daughter-in-law.
Each time, the security system activated or bystanders called the police, making Margaret known as a troublemaker in town. Exhausted by her persistence, Jeffrey and I consulted the police and obtained a restraining order. Margaret, looking for a new target, started attending matchmaking parties, but with no money, job, or proper appearance. She was turned away at the door, becoming infamous as a party crasher. Finally, Margaret's assaults stopped, and we live in peace.
Mom, I was out of my mind back then. Margaret cut me off from home, screamed at me all day. I've finally come to my senses. I'm so sorry.
Jeffrey and I are living together again. Whether Jeffrey remarries or stays with me, I'm happy as long as he shows true kindness to others.